week 17 of the fantasy football season. And if you made your championship, congratulations. And hopefully this week you could pull it out and win it. So here's the top 12 kickers I'm ranking heading into week 17. And time of recording this video, none of these players have been placed on the COVID or safety protocol list. The first guy, Nick Folk of the New England Patriots. And Nick Folk, he's been one of the best kickers this season in fantasy football. I know over the last few weeks here, he's had pretty bad ball games in terms of fantasy points. Week 13 at Buffalo 7, Week 15 at the Colts 4, and Week 16 versus Buffalo 3. But this week here, an amazing matchup versus the Jacksonville Jaguars that give up the third most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So I think here New England's going to be in the red zone early and often, and they're going to have to settle for some field goals, I believe, in this ball game. But right here, Nick Folk's been a great kicker this season. Just last few weeks, the opportunities haven't been there. But this week, he bounces back, and I got him at number 1 this week. Number 2, Justin Tucker of the Baltimore Ravens. So Justin Tucker, we know he's been one of the best kickers of all time, is Tucker. And this week here, he's got a pretty decent matchup versus the Rams that are a bend but don't break type of defense, giving up 14th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So the last few weeks here for Tucker, Week 14 at Cleveland 15, Week 15 versus Green Bay 6, Week 16 at Cincinnati 3. So the last few weeks here, I know his points have gone down a little, but right here, like I mentioned, Lamar Jackson should be back in this game. This offense should be getting in the red zone more, and this Raven team, they definitely need to win now after losing 4 ball games in a row. So this is do or die now pretty much for this Raven team here, and they just got to settle for some field goals instead of making some bonehead plays, in my opinion, and trying to push the envelope too much and going for 2 when they could have just went into overtime a few times and won it there, especially with a kicker like Tucker. So this week here, I think the Ravens are going to try to play smart, not take too many chances, and that means more field goal opportunities, in my opinion, for Tucker. Number 3, Greg the Leg Zuerlein of the Dallas Cowboys. So Greg the Leg and the Cowboys, they've been on a hot streak over the last few weeks here, with their defense really putting in big performances and getting this offense in field goal range, because this offense really hasn't been intact, except obviously that Week 16 blow-up game, scoring 56 points. So Greg the Leg, the last few weeks here, Week 14 at Washington 12, Week 15 at the Giants 4, and Week 16 versus Washington 8. So right here, Week 17, Arizona gives up the 20th most fantasy points to kickers. But this ball game, in my opinion, I think is going to be a shootout between 2 pretty high-powered offenses. I know Hopkins is out. I know James Conner is questionable in this game. But I think in this one, Arizona is going to play a great game. And the Cowboys, they're going to have to be better on offense. Like I mentioned, I know they put up 56 points, but in this one, they're going to have to score more to win this game. And right here, they're going to rely on Greg the Leg to hit a few big ones in this game. And I think performance this week, but I got him at 3. Number 4, Tyler Bass of the Buffalo Bills. So another kicker struggling over the last few weeks of the season here. Week 14 at Tampa 7, Week 15 versus Carolina 6, and Week 16 in New England 8. So those numbers aren't horrible at a kicking position, but we're used to Bears scoring 9 or plus more fantasy points early in the season. So right here, this week, a good matchup versus the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons here, they really don't stop anyone on defense, and I think in this one, Bears could have one of the better games he's had all season here, and it wouldn't be surprising to me if he reaches double digits. I got him at number 4. Number 5, Matt Gay of the Los Angeles Rams. So Gay, he's on one of the best offenses in all pro football. And the last few weeks here, he's been the best kicker in the last month for fantasy football owners. Week 13 versus Jacksonville 15, Week 14 at Arizona 14, Week 15 versus Seattle 10, Week 16 in Minnesota 11. So right here this week, a matchup at the Ravens, who give up the 25 most fantasy points, which obviously isn't a great number for Matt Gay, but this guy's been accurate. He's been kicking field goals 50 plus easily this season here. One of the best offenses in football. So Baltimore, I think they'll stop this Ram offense a few times, but it doesn't mean they won't be in field goal position. And I think once again he reaches double-digit fantasy points this week. Number 6, Ryan Succop of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Succop, it's been an up-and-down season for him here, where you figured he's on a great team like the Tampa Bay Bucks. Well, he'll have big fantasy days, but he's only had 2 double-digit fantasy games, Week 11 and Week 16. And besides that, he really hasn't done much since Week 5. But the last few weeks here for Succop, Week 14 versus Buffalo 7, Week 15 versus New Orleans, they got shut out in that ball game, so he obviously had 0. And then last week at Carolina, a huge ball game, 15 fantasy points. So this week here, a great matchup for Suck up at the New York Jets that give up the second most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And this Buck offense, they're going to be in the red zone early and often. And I think Suck up this week once again has a good ball game. And I got him at number 6. Number 7, Robbie Gould of the San Francisco 49ers. So the 49ers have the Houston Texans coming to town. And this defense, they don't really stop anyone. We saw Hopkins have a big game last week kicking the football versus Houston. So Gould the last few weeks here, he's been mediocre. Week 14 at Cincinnati 7. Week 15 versus the Falcons 7. Week 16 at Tennessee 6. And week 17 here, though, great matchup versus Houston. And I think he has a better game than he's had over the last few weeks. And Houston stops at nobody. So right here, Trey Lance most likely will start, but I still think San Francisco at least gets in the red zone a decent amount of times. And I think Robbie Gould will have a good game, and he's a better kicker at home than he is on the road. The next kicker is Greg Joseph of the Minnesota Vikings. So Joseph, he's still been a pretty solid kicker for fantasy owners. Week 14 versus Pittsburgh, 10 fantasy points. Week 15 at Chicago, 5. And Week 16 versus the Rams, 10. So this week here, tough matchup on paper at Green Bay that gives up the 5th least amount of fantasy points to kickers on the season. But Joseph going back to Week 11 still had a decent ball game versus the Packers that gave up 7 fantasy points to that. So we know Joseph's got a big leg. We know the weather conditions in Green Bay could go either way, where it could be just cold or it could even be snowing. We just don't know. But that's a Sunday night football game where it's going to be freezing between two division rivals. But I still think Greg Joseph could have a good ball game this week here. And I'm going to play it safe and rank him number 8. Number 9, Michael Badgley of the Indianapolis Colts. I've gotten a lot of questions over the last few days here about Michael Badgley to see if he's going to be affected by Carson Wentz being out. But I've been telling people that, let's be honest here, Jonathan Taylor is the engine that runs this offense here for this Indianapolis Colts team. But Badgley's got a good matchup. Vegas gives up the 5th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And even if Wentz don't play in this ball game, I still think they'll have many opportunities in the red zone. It's another indoor game. And the last few weeks here for Badgley, Week 13 at Houston 6, Week 15 versus New England 9, and Week 16 at Arizona 9. So this week here, I think anywhere from 7 to 9 fantasy points is a definite once again for Badgley. Just going off his track record this season here. And I know Wentz might be out, but let's be real. Jonathan Taylor, for the most part, has been carrying this offense. And Wentz, he's been a good game manager and making plays at times when they needed him to. But Badgley this week here will be fine. And I got him at number 9. Number 10 this week, Daniel Carlson of the Las Vegas Raiders. So this ball game with Indianapolis and the Raiders, I think both teams here are going to put up some decent points. But I also could see the Raiders turning the ball over a decent amount of times. But Carlson this season, he's been pretty much money for fantasy owners. Week 13 versus Washington 11. Week 14 at Kansas City, it was just a throwout game overall for this Raider team where they lost 48-9, so we had no points in that one. Week 15 at Cleveland 11, and Week 16 versus Denver 6. So right here, I know the Colts give up the second least amount of fantasy points to kickers on the season, but Carlson here, I think he'd have a good ball game. This is an indoor game, which is always a plus, obviously, for kickers and all position players. So right here, I think Carlson has a decent game, 7 or 8 fantasy points. And I got him in number 10, number 11, Matt Prater of the Arizona Cardinals. So Prater, he's been struggling over the last few weeks here, missing some field goals and not really putting up points. Week 14 versus the Rams, a great game, 16 fantasy points. And then the last 2 weeks here, his numbers have went way down. Week 15 at Detroit 4, and last week in Week 16 versus Indy 1. But right here, Week 17 at Dallas, I could see this ball game be a shootout. 2 high-powered offenses, good playmakers on both sides of the ball. And I could see Prater here bounce back and get anywhere from 8 to 9 fantasy points in this one. We know he's got a big boot. We know the last couple weeks he hasn't been hitting those long ones he's been missing. But I think he bounces back in this one at Jerry World. And this is a huge game for the Cardinals. They've lost 3 games in a row here, and they got to bounce back. And it starts with the kicker hitting some good field goals and Kyler Murray not turning the ball over. So I think this week here, he turns it around as Prater. And the 12th and final kicker I'm ranking this week's Jason Myers of the Seattle Seahawks. And Myers, he hasn't been good, no doubt about it, this season for fantasy owners. But right here, he's a 1-week recommended top 12 kicker versus the Detroit Lions. I give up the most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So the last few weeks here for Myers, like I mentioned, he really hasn't done much. Week 14 at Houston, 3. Week 15 at the Rams, 4. And then last week versus the Bears in a good matchup. A decent game with 6. So this week here, Seattle's at home. It could be tough kicking conditions with the winds and the weather, like we saw snow there last week. But I think Myers in this one has a decent game. And the Lions do give up the most fantasy points to kickers. So right here, I got him at number 12. So that's the top 12 kickers I'm ranking here for Week 17 of the fantasy football season.